Hey everybody, this is Craig Baldwin, partner at Upsourced, to have another creative outcomes discussion. It's come up quite a bit recently with clients, and we've seen this in other communities that we've been involved in, that rate card discussions are top of mind, especially as we hit end of year, beginning of 2026, when these things are up for review. This is especially sensitive with large enterprise clients who have procurement teams and are analyzing costs and then pushing that pressure onto us. And so this is something that we want to address in today's conversation. This will not be a long video, but we want to talk about a couple different ways to approach rate card discussions with clients and ways to defend yourself as you're going through that process, especially at the beginning of the year. So just as a quick reminder for those of you who have never watched a creative outcomes video before, which how dare you, my name is Craig Baldwin. I am a co-founder and partner at Upsource. Started my career at Deloitte and Touche. This says 13 years at Upsource, now 14 years Upsource, or just about coming up in April, with a background in agency and tech sales leadership, and have spent a lot of time around professional services in general. You don't need to worry about my interests other than I spend a lot of time with my family and I think a great deal of them. All right, what is Upsource if you're not familiar with the brand? We are an accounting and CFO provider exclusively to the creative services market. We've been doing this for almost 14 years, as I said earlier. We've only been working with the agencies since about 2017. Today, we're actually even more than 35. We're probably closer to 45 professionals today. And so when we talk about agencies and the financial mechanics that underpin their business, we are speaking from a great deal of experience. All right, so let's talk about the topic which has brought you here to listen to this video or watch my not so pretty face. First of all, when we're having conversations about annual price increases for services, these are always best had proactively and not something that we want to deliver reactively or without letting the client know in advance. We've all probably been in that situation where we're getting surprise price increases on the other side of the table, and that's never a positive way to start any conversation. We don't want to put anyone on the defensive. So, to the best of your ability, if you know that you need to increase prices, or in this case, your rates for a specific client, these things are best tackled weeks, even months in advance, letting the client know that they need to get their mind around an increase which is on the way but has not yet happened. If we do not have the luxury of having that conversation, or having had that conversation, I should say, that leaves us with fewer options. So this is where we are managing the buyer in a way which might be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more complicated. Now, let me just take a step back and say, especially for those organizations who are managing rate cards or analyzing them and looking to negotiate, these are probably large organizations. So you're not just working with the individual or team who is consuming your services. You're probably also having to manage the person who signed for that contract. They could be on that team. They could be the boss of the person who you're working with day to day. They could be the boss's boss. You're also probably having to work with someone in procurement. That is to say, once that contract is signed, it's thrown over the fence to procurement, or they were a part of the initial negotiation process and the redlining process. We all know how fun that is. And now they're coming back to you in many cases at the beginning of the year saying they need to show changes to their organization or improvement, and they're asking for an improved rate card. We have to manage all the stakeholders within this conversation, and it's usually best done to begin with the person who's getting the greatest benefit from the services we're providing. In some cases, this may be considered the quote-unquote champion. It may be the direct client who's also signing for or paying for quote-unquote from their own budget. it's likely not procurement, but we need to get that person to be a positive voice on our behalf within the organization, whether they are paying the bill, quote unquote, or not. That is the best first step here. The next best step is to make sure that if they are not the person paying the bill, the person paying the bill sees the world the way your champion does. That is to say, they're very happy with the output of the work. They're very happy with the services they're receiving in general. They don't want to disrupt the flow of those services. And so they are more likely to accept some type of price increase and or at the very least, a steady state rate card, and certainly not reduce those rates. Those are the two biggest priorities as we prepare for what could be a situation where we're having to defend our value. The last step would be managing procurement. In this situation, it is not uncommon for a procurement team, especially on net new SOWs, to surface old rate cards. That is to say, rate cards which are a lower amount than what you're currently charging. If we have those two parties or stakeholders at our side, the champion and the individual who's actually paying for the work, again, they could be the same person, then it's easier for us to go to procurement and get the changes through. If we do not have that advantage, if we do not have that leverage, then we probably need to negotiate with procurement. We need to understand what is the change they're looking to make and if there's any compromise that can be made. So let me give you a tangible example of this, something that I actually did in the past when I was running a mobile app team at a large publicly traded company. For the large mobile apps that we used to build for very large financial or banking clients, we would always sell service contracts or support contracts. I think many of you are probably accustomed to this idea. Our support or I should say the support contracts tended to be at least a 1-year term, but if we could sell them for longer duration, that would be great. Of course, the economics of our costs change over the course of a year, let alone a couple years. So it is not uncommon for us to have to go back to the client the following year or at the end of the term and ask for more money. Since this was a contract which was not massive in size, but did require an increase from what was previously signed for, we did end up in front of procurement. Our main champion, the person receiving that work day to day, did not have strong feelings. The person who was paying for the project was not accessible. They were so high up in the organization, we never got FaceTime with them. And that left us with procurement. So in the case of procurement, when we talked to them, I said to them preemptively, I know you need to show progress for your organization. And they said, yes, you are correct. So what we did very quickly was concede some discount on our increase. So instead of increasing to $21,000 for the year as an example, which was from our original $15,000 a year, I offered, why don't we increase to just $18,000? That helps to support our cost infrastructure, ensures that we can still deliver the same level of service, and you can go back to your organization and show a win for the role that you play, which is containing cost, which in many cases is a primary function of procurement. That took 10 minutes to have that conversation. We moved on with life. While we did not get the full amount that we wanted, we certainly got more than what we were already receiving, and the procurement person was happy, and now we were focused on the next SOW that we could put in front of that client in the next 6 months. So if you're managing that rate card conversation, be proactive, make sure you're aware of all the stakeholders that are behind the scenes or in front that you know, and then have a good relationship to the extent it's possible with the procurement team or your procurement contact so that you can manage expectation and you're not put in a place where you're having to answer a lot of awkward questions about defending your value, because that can be very challenging and can sometimes come off the wrong way. All right, So next, a lot of people want to go to, are we pricing correctly? How much is too much to ask? How much is not enough? Okay, well, there's some basics around this that really don't have a lot to do with the defending the increase in ask or the rate card, but just go back to fundamentals. Like I said earlier, Upsource is a specialist in the financial mechanics that underpin agencies, and I'm going to show you an example why. So I'm going to back out real quickly. Apologies for my messy desktop. I'm sure that's driving some people crazy. And we're going to talk about the margin triangle. So if you're not familiar with this concept, the expected gross margin of your agency can be determined by two key metrics that we all experience. Now, I'm not going to get into an argument about time tracking. I'm not a zealot about time tracking necessarily, but let's just assume that I know some information about the utilization of my team, and I know some information about the margin on a particular project or any number of projects, okay? If that is the case, if I were to get in my organization, let's pretend I run an agency right now, if I were to have a project margin of 50% on any given project, and I had a utilization across all of my service staff of about 80%, that would produce a 37.5% gross margin, which by most standards is relatively low, or lower than we would like, I should say, for a professional service business. Typically, we love to see clients at that 50% mark or higher. If you're in the 40s, that tends to be manageable, because this is before I introduce things like my operating expenditures, i.e. what some people might call overhead, which will reduce from that number. So I love to see, for most agencies, 50% gross margin, 25% as a percentage of revenue in operating expenditures, which will get me roughly a 25% net operating income. If I can be closer to 30, that's fantastic. If I'm above that, I'm really kicking butt. But generally speaking, that tends to be a good agency. Yes, we can accept less, but then at a certain point, it just becomes the leadership or owner's discretion, okay? So I want this to sink in because it's important. Most people underestimate the project margin which is required to produce a 50% gross margin in their business, okay? So let's say that this 50% is now 67%. Well, now, see how that dramatically impacts my expected gross margin. Now I don't actually need all of my service staff to be 80% utilized. I can accept something a little bit lower. So let's say they're 75%. Okay, still fantastic, 56%, okay? Let's go down even lower, 65%. All right, so now I'm just at about that 50% threshold that we talked about. If I'm pricing and delivering work at this project margin in this case, and it pairs with the utilization, which I'm seeing within my organization at 65%, I am a happy camper as a business owner, right? This is it. These are the levers that I have to work with. This is just immutable laws of math, which do not always manifest themselves in a very clean way within our businesses. But when you're building a business in a spreadsheet, in this case, these are things which are known. And now it's our job as owners and operators to make it so in reality, right? Now, let's take this a step further, because I've put out a pretty hefty target of 67% in project margin. How did I get there? Well, let me show you. So I actually have a sample, more than a rate card, but a price estimator that I use internally actually at Upsource. So this is a pared down version of what we use at Upsource. I have my cost rates in here. I've effectively developed a rate card that we use internally, and I can show you some of these costs that are going on. This is an older rate card, and all the names are hidden to protect the innocent type thing, but this just gives you a rough idea of what you can expect as you are looking to estimate work. And then, of course, our job as operators is to make sure that the actual of what we do matches that estimation, or at least gets kind of close, right? So let's assume that I'm building out a project. In my case, I'm using an example which is hours per month, because I'm delivering a recurring or retainer-based service. And I can build that estimate with a number of different roles, which are specific to my organization. In this case, we call them senior controller, senior accountant, and specialist. These could be junior designer, creative director, developer, developer 1, developer 3, you name it, right? This can be changed for the organization that you run, the staff that you have, and the estimates or rate card, which would be built based upon your cost structure, right? It can be changed for any of those things. You can also see things like fixed fees, hard costs, etc. Very common within the work that we do, right? So let's just say that I'm building out an estimate. And sorry, just let my OCD kick in here. I'm building out an estimate which requires, for the level of effort to deliver the work which we are promising to the client in our scope, this is the effort which I think will be required from an hour's perspective per month for these roles. 10 for senior controller, 8 for controller, 6 for senior accountant, 4 for accountant, 2 for specialist. Now, listen, I'll be the first to tell you that ideally, this would probably be the inverse, because I'm not building a very good kind of leverage model here, but just for the sake of conversation, this is what we have. Now, if I flip back to my other tab, and sorry, this is messing with the view of me. There we go. Okay. In my estimator, that would spit out a target margin of 66.67%, right? So in my margin triangle, I got there, right? That's my expected margin before I actually do any of the work. This is what I'm shooting for. Now, I have the ability to discount that, which I actually did as an example in here. And when I discount that, I get a projected margin of 63%. These are all things that we can know before we do the work, or at least we should know. We should have an idea. We should have an expectation. And so when I asked the question, or at least the original prompt, which was, are we charging enough or are we not charging enough? It doesn't take a lot of work, and it doesn't require a conversation with procurement to know whether that's the case. Now, it may change the answer to, can we get enough from the client? Well, to get enough, we have to earn that right. We have to have trust with the client. We have to manage the personalities. We have to manage those stakeholders that we talked about earlier, and manage procurement even in a proactive manner. But if I know and have my most up-to-date rate card for the cost infrastructure I have within my business, if I'm doing accurate estimation, now it doesn't mean that the realities of the project don't dictate different economics, because they very well might, but I at least want to set an expectation before I go down that path. And from here, now I know for fact what rate card to put in front of my client when I ask for that money, right? In addition to that, if for whatever reason the client does not want to accept the rate that I'm asking for and they want a lower one, it does not take a lot of effort for me to actually go back and revise my estimate for that lower rate card. So the cost infrastructure for me is still the same, but I'm going to be asking less money for that cost infrastructure. And I can see immediately the impact to my project margin. If I use 10% as an example, as we show here, it actually goes down to 63 as opposed to the original final margin, which would be 66.67. I can decide as the owner if I'm willing to accept that, right? And there are a number of different levers, either in this particular project or within the business, that I can pull, quote unquote, in order to still get the expected margin that I want. Now, I know that was a lot of math. I know that was a lot of spreadsheet. I don't like to run a business from a spreadsheet, but sometimes they are useful tools to help us set expectation, and from my perspective, to bound risk within the conversations that I'm going to have with other human beings, because we all know how that can go sideways very quickly, or sometimes it can surprise us to the upside. So let me jump back to the PowerPoint and ask you the question of, are you pricing correctly, and are you analyzing margins to make sure you're charging enough or not overcharging? If you're doing these exercises, I would feel confident that you know the ramifications of the decisions that you're making, and that will give you more conviction when you're talking to the client and defending your value, so to speak, around the prices that you've put in front of them, the latest SOW, or just overall rate cards, whether that's with the champion, the budget owner, or procurement. So with that, I hope this leads to additional great discussion with your teams. You're more than welcome to talk to your Upsourced team if you're a client today about what this looks like for you. These are all tools that they use every single day. And if we've never met before, you're more than welcome to reach out and talk rate cards or defending value or managing expectations with the client anytime. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Creative Outcomes with Upsource. Hope you have a great week. Thanks, everybody.